Welcome back, Earth Science students. This will be week 4 that we are going to be on online learning. We are finishing up our first unit today with a brief overview of the carbon cycle and how carbon moves throughout our Earth and all of its systems as well. We will be taking the unit test during the next block of time. So it'll be open to you guys starting on Wednesday, or actually starting on Thursday, and it'll be due Sunday. Okay, this week is kind of light in material. There's not a whole lot of new stuff. I'm hoping that all of you can get caught up in this class and other classes, and then we can start Unit 2 1 week from today. And so let's just get into it. Okay, so let's start talking about carbon. First of all, what is carbon? It's the 6th atom on our periodic table. It is in a lot of different compounds, and it is very, very important to our life. Okay, it can be in the form of a gas in carbon dioxide, CO2, methane gas, which is our natural gas, CH4. It can be a liquid, it can be gasoline. C8H18 is how we get gasoline. It can be a rock and CO3. It can be a lot of different things. It is present in all organic material and materials made from once living things. Okay, it can also be found in inorganic materials such as rocks. Okay, so it is found a lot across the entire Earth. All right, so before we get into carbon and where it's at and how we're going to be using it, let's talk about the 4 different spheres that make up our Earth. Okay, so we have the atmosphere, which is air. Okay, all of you guys know what the atmosphere is. Biosphere, which is all of the living things. Okay, that's plants, animals, all that stuff. Hydrosphere, which is the water, our oceans, our lakes, our rivers, all of the stuff that contains water. And lastly, we have our geosphere, which is all of the land components, all the rocks and all the stuff that goes along with land. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to talk about how carbon is exchanged between different spheres. So how we get from the biosphere carbon to the atmosphere carbon and all the stuff in between. So make sure that you are keeping track of how things enter certain spheres and how things exit certain spheres. So we're going to start with atmosphere, and all of these are the ways that things enter the atmosphere. So number 1, humans and animals breathing out carbon dioxide puts more carbon dioxide into the air. Okay, fires create carbon dioxide. Okay, so wildfires put more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Volcanic eruptions, they do a couple, kind of both. That's actually technically from the geosphere because it's coming from the inside of the Earth. Okay, so the inside of the Earth, a volcanic eruption is obviously going to have some carbon dioxide. So that is an exchange from the geosphere into the atmosphere. Exchanges with the ocean, we're going to talk about the surface ocean and the atmosphere. They exchange carbon dioxide all the time, pretty much constantly, because they're constantly in this battle between carbon dioxide. Burning fossil fuels, burning our oils and our coal and all of that produces carbon dioxide, which also gets released into the atmosphere. Rocks reacting with chemicals, that's going to be a breakdown again in the geosphere, because anytime you're dealing with rocks releasing gases, it's going to be the rocks are part of the geosphere, so it's going from geosphere into the atmosphere. Okay, carbon dioxide leaves the atmosphere by photosynthesis, so plants take in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through the process of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis of phytoplankton, or tiny water plants, also from the biosphere. Okay, so they're taking in carbon dioxide. And then when I was talking about there's an exchange between ocean water and the atmosphere, this is what I'm talking about. So not only does the atmosphere get carbon dioxide from the ocean, the ocean also takes some of the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere as well. So there's an exchange there. And we'll talk about the numbers here in a little bit about how that all works. Moving on to the biosphere, we're going to talk about how it enters the biosphere, which goes along with some of the things that we were just talking about how it leaves the atmosphere. So it enters the biosphere, all the living things, through photosynthesis of plants, photosynthesis of phytoplankton and tiny water plants. Okay, again, that's coming from the atmosphere to the biosphere. And then finally, the animals eating plants and the phytoplankton. So they're going to get some of that carbon that was taken in from those plants. So when we eat any of the plants that we eat, all the vegetables and fruits and stuff, we are taking in carbon dioxide ourselves because we are eating things that took it in through photosynthesis. Okay, carbon dioxide and methane leave the biosphere in a couple ways. The decomposition of plants and animals. Okay, so when we decompose or animals decompose, they release methane gas and carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. And then, like I was saying, when we breathe out, we are breathing out carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as well. Okay, so notice that the biosphere and atmosphere, they work very, very hand in hand on entering or giving carbon dioxide, but also taking carbon dioxide in another exchange of carbon dioxide. All right, next we're on to the hydrosphere. Okay, so in the hydrosphere, all the water, carbon dioxide enters the hydrosphere by dissolving carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So atmosphere again is exchanging with the hydrosphere. Decomposition of plants and animals in the biosphere, so all the marine life that dies and decomposes in the oceans also puts more carbon into the oceans. Decomposing sea plants, seaweed, all kinds of that stuff. Also, when it decomposes, it's going to be putting more carbon into the ocean. Okay, lastly, it leaves. So carbon compounds are exchanged with the atmosphere and the geosphere. Okay, much like I was talking about, it leaves with that exchange with the atmosphere at the surface of the ocean. The air will take some out and as well as put some in the geosphere. It exchanges with the coastlines and the sediments along the bottom of the ocean also take in some carbon as well. So just that interaction with the rocks and with the water, there's an exchange of carbon in that way as well. Okay, and lastly, we have the geosphere, so all of our rocks. Okay, so carbon dioxide enters the geosphere by formation of fossil fuels from the biosphere. Again, fossil fuels are created by the breakdown or the decomposition of plants and animals over time. Okay, the formation of rocks like limestone. Remember that water dissolves limestone, creating caves and all that stuff, and that's a chemical reaction, that's dissolution, chemical weathering that we talked about earlier. So that's another way that the carbon enters the geosphere through the channel of rivers or water in that sense. Hey, carbon dioxide leaves the geosphere by the burning of fossil fuels. Okay, so the burning of coal and oil and all that stuff is part of the geosphere because it's part of our Earth. And then the second way is through volcanic eruptions. If you imagine all the buildup of carbon dioxide in the core of the Earth gets released into the atmosphere, and so there's an exchange there between the geosphere and the atmosphere. Okay, so what I want you to think about, okay, we've gone over a lot. Hey, brainstorm real quick. I'm going to give you some time. Brainstorm some examples of how these interactions play out. Okay, so just any examples, think of them to yourself, write them down, whatever you need to do, but think of a way that, excuse me, the geosphere gives carbon to the atmosphere, and the atmosphere gives carbon to the geosphere, and likewise for all of these situations. Think about it for, I don't know, about a minute or so, and then we'll get right back to the video here in a second. All right, I'll give you about 20 more seconds to think of all of them. Ten more seconds. Okay, so here are the ones that I came up with. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can just kind of see all the ones that we talked about in this video, and there's actually some extras on there that I have in case you're looking at them. For example, I don't think I talked about the formation of shells in coral, but that's one way that the geosphere interacts with the biosphere. If you imagine on like a coral reef, there's a bunch of vegetation and that sort of thing, as well as rocks. And so there's an exchange of carbon between the living animals and vegetation and the rocks that also have carbon in them and that sort of thing. Okay, other than that, a lot of them are the same as what we mentioned about how these things are exchanged. Okay, and then the last thing that we need to talk about, or that I want to talk about, is just kind of an overview of like the numbers. I think it gives you a good graphic of how things interact. Okay, so that would be this picture, and you can kind of see the numbers that they give for each year, and it's just basically pentagrams of carbon per year, I believe is what that is. Pentagrams. No, I'm gonna have to look that up. 1 second. Petagram. Petagram. Okay. Petagram of carbon per year. And you can kind of see in here, if you pause the video and want to look at some of these numbers more closely, you can see what the exact exchanges are. So for example, one thing to point out is that the surface ocean puts more carbon into the atmosphere than it takes in per year, which it's relatively close, but over time, if you imagine, more and more carbon is getting out of the ocean than going into the ocean, which can be detrimental to our atmosphere in some sense. There's also an exchange between the marine biota. Biota just means like the marine life. This is part of the biosphere. The marine biota is part of the biosphere. So there's an exchange between the ocean. So when it decays, it gives back to the ocean 37 pgc per year. And then the surface ocean, the marine animal life and plant life take in carbon from the surface ocean at 48. And you can just kind of see all of these interactions playing out in a kind of a more interactive way of seeing the actual things that are interacting. Other than that, that is all I have for you. Make sure that you do the assignment for this week and start reviewing and getting prepared for the unit test coming up on Thursday, or you can take it, you can take it anytime between Thursday and Sunday. As always, if you have questions or you need help or you want to review for the final, just either email me, message me on Teams, come into office hours, whatever you need to do, and we'll get through this and we'll get on to new stuff. Thanks for watching.